Hi there guys, Mike from MCQBushcraft here, and welcome to another episode of Bushcraft Basics. In the last episode we had a look at knife safety, and we really just highlighted a little bit of common sense to help you out when you're using knives in the field, because if you're far away from people or civilization and you have a serious injury, that injury is always amplified given the distance you are away, because you can't get help too easily. But in this week's episode we're actually going to be having a look at maintaining knives. And maintaining knives is a pretty variable subject. It really depends on a lot of different factors. What are you actually using the knives for, in terms of the material the blade is being put through? What kind of environment are you in? Are you by the coastline? Are you in a very hot, dry environment? Is it humid, or is it very damp and wet? And what's your knife made of? What kind of steel, what kind of materials is your knife actually made of? What's the sheath made of? All these things can really affect the lifespan of your knife and how often you need to take a look at it and maintain it, and hopefully this video will help out. In front of me here I have three knives, and they're three very different knives in some respects. We have a Mora here with a carbon steel blade and plastic handle. We have a Jacklaw knife here, and that has 01 tool steel, so a carbon steel blade, a wooden handle, although this wood is very much like plastic in a respect because it's been stabilised, and stabilisation means where resin is sucked into the grain and it almost becomes like plastic, unable to absorb anything. And it's a more modern process you see a lot these days that knife makers use because it stops wood expanding and shrinking with temperature and humidity in the air, and moisture obviously. We have another knife here which has G10 for scales, and this is a stainless steel, and this is RWL34, which is an incredibly high performance steel, very expensive to actually use RWL34, but edge retention and the performance of the steel is way above many carbon steels, so this one here is of the lowest in terms of its maintenance. So just for having a brief look at these knives here, and this is obviously a tiny selection of what's actually out there, and there are a lot of different variations and things you can do with the steels to protect them, like coated carbon blades for example. You can get a very good idea of how choosing the right knife for your environment is quite important. If you live on the coastline, you spend a lot of time coastal foraging or fishing, and you're in that environment, and you decide to go with a carbon steel knife and a leather sheath, you're in for a pretty difficult ride in some respects. You'll be maintaining that knife all the time, and it will inevitably have a very hard life and probably see a lot of corrosion. But let's have a look at some items here that we can use to maintain these knives, and we'll go over how you can actually maintain the knife. I've got some basic items here, and these are really just maintenance tools that I use for blades that I carry with me in the field. Sometimes I do carry my Jacklaw on me, and it's useful to have things like oil to help protect the carbon steel blade. So I've got here a small pot, and this is a brass oil pot out of a Lee Enfield rifle. And one of the older pots, you'll find they're brass. They went to Bakelite a bit later, and they're more common and they're actually a bit cheaper, but these brass pots are quite nice. If you do end up getting one of these, what I will suggest is that you just replace this seal here, it'll be leather, replace it with a bit of rubber, and that way there's no chance of it leaking. But if we open this up, you can see it's full of oil, and it's got an applicator just there, so you can put the oil wherever you wish. It's quite good for firearms as well, which is obviously its original intention, and that lip there, that light applicator, really does help put it into the action of the firearm that you carry on you. So it's a good little multifunctional tool to actually use for maintaining metal objects that you bring out with you in the field that are prone to corrosion, and being brass, it's quite sturdy and not going to actually rot on you there. The kind of oil I use in this is walnut oil, but food grade walnut oil, and that way I can actually take this off, pour this into a pan and fry things. For example, if you wanted to fry some stinging nettle leaves and make some crisps, you could pour this into a frying pan, put the stinging nettle leaves in, fry them, and then you've got some food there to snack on the trail. So to have a food grade oil, it means you could use it on your skin as well, so you can put it on your hands to moisturise them so they don't get very velcro-y like they do when you're in the field for a long time, or on your lips if you've got chapped lips. So a useful little pot there. I do carry a honing stone as well. This is a Spyderco double stuff stone. It's got a coarse side, which is actually very fine, and a very, very fine honing side, which is fantastic when the blade just maybe has a little bit of a nick in it, for example, like just a slight dullness in one area, and you just need to bring it back. And this is also very useful for an axe as well. It's quite long, and it can be used to actually hone the axe back to being shaving sharp as well. It does come in a leather sort of sheath, or container. I did try using this as a strop, and I just found the grain of the leather to be too fussed. The grain is just a bit too fussed for me. I prefer a bit of a finer grain for a strop, much harder, thinner leather, and this is just a bit too fussed. But that doesn't mean you can't remake one. It's not exactly difficult to make something like this, 2 plates of leather, stitch around, and there you go, you can make yourself a strop. And the nice thing about that is the sharpening stone underneath will be that hard flat surface for you to strop on, and it makes quite a nice set actually. So at some point I will make a leather case for this that will act as a strop, but for the time being I'm just using it as it is to protect the actual stone. But I do have a little strop here, just something I use for the time being, just a piece of oak with some hard leather on, and this leather is quite thick but very hard, really, really dense oak tanned leather. And the kind of thickness of the leather you're going to use will really have to reflect the kind of knife you carry, and we'll touch on that in a second. But this is a strop, and I have some stropping compound there. This is Starkey Blue, and this is a very good stropping compound, or you can use Auto Sol as well, which is used on cars for polishing metal. And there are also many other stropping compounds around that you'll see in the description below this video, so it doesn't have to be Starkey Blue, because if you're in the States you might have trouble getting hold of this. And that's really my maintenance kit for whichever tools I bring out with me. The leather you use for stropping can really be picked to suit the grind of your knife. For example, if you have a Scandinavian grind blade, which is quite a flat zero grind, and you want to keep that zero grind, you wouldn't choose a very thick, soft piece of leather to actually strop on, because that leather will compress as you drag that bevel through, and it will start to round it gradually over time. Only very, very slowly, and it'll be very subtle. But if you want to keep that true zero grind, to have that blade perform at its optimum when working with wood, you would really want to choose a different leather to strop on rather than something thick and spongy. So a very thin, hard piece of leather would probably be a bit better with a very fine grain to conform true to that zero grind and really keep it as is. It's a bit like stropping off of a tree with a belt. If I took this belt off and hooked it onto this hazel tree here, and I was stropping away and I was using a Scandi grind, that would be really bad for the bevel. You may want, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're in a situation and you had to do that to your knife, you're better off putting the belt on a flat surface and doing it that way and conforming to that bevel, so you're not rounding it quite horribly over a long period of time. Obviously it's all very subtle, but it does make a difference, and when you hold the blade to the light you can actually see that. You can see that rounding take place. Some people like the blade to be slightly rounded. I know a lot of people who do, because it makes it a little bit stronger in the field. They even add a secondary bevel to a Scandi grind to make it even tougher, so it doesn't roll too easily. But if you just want to keep that true Scandi grind for working with wood, use a thin, flat piece of leather and mount it to a block of wood like this, and it'll strop a lot better and conform to that edge. But if you have got a convex ground blade, then stropping off of a tree won't be so bad, or using a thick piece of spongy leather is kind of really what you want to do to conform to that rounded edge a bit more. And that would actually have benefits, whether it wouldn't with other types of grind. So you can see how choosing the right piece of leather for your strop is quite important. You don't want to be using techniques in the field and actually kind of making your knife worse. But really the first part of maintaining a knife is seeing whether a knife needs maintenance, and there are a few things you can do. The first thing you can do is look down the blade and hold it to the light and see whether you can see any flat spots on the edge where you can actually see light reflecting off of it. And you can tilt the blade ever so slightly and just see whether you can see any flat areas, and that'll tell you that the edge is ever so slightly rolled. You don't want any chips, but rolls are fairly normal on an edge if you give it a lot of abuse, and this one's been really heavily abused in the last 2 weeks, and I would expect a little bit of rolling here and there. And there's just two tiny little spots there and there where light is reflecting back at me, so that could do with being stropped out. If we look at this jack claw here, I would probably expect the same. It's been used very heavily recently. I'm just holding it up to the light, and again on the belly, in fact just there, we have a little flat spot there where the edge is just rolled very slightly, and that could do with being stropped out as well. So that doesn't need to be resharpened, and neither does that. Just stropping those rolls out will be absolutely fine, and that's all we need to do in terms of maintenance. So if I'm using my carbon steel knife, a jack claw here, we had a look at the blade, and on the edge there we saw a little bit of micro rolling, which is very normal. It's had a bit of a hard job to do. I wouldn't use the stone. It doesn't need to be used at all. In terms of maintenance, I would take the strop. It's on a piece of wood, so I've always got a flat surface. It's easy to find a flat surface in a classroom environment when you're out doing bushcraft courses, but when you actually get out into the woods, there's very few of them unless you make your own by making hearth boards, for example, like you would a bow drill set. But we can just put a bit of stropping compound on. There's already a bit on there. We don't need too much. And on this log here, I'll just try and conform to the edge. I've got ivy here and some lumps there, so never an ideal environment, which is why you have to make it comfortable for yourself. But you can see you just need to conform to that edge and just carry on going through. I usually do 2 strokes either side. And you push quite hard. And that really should have taken it out. And that looks a lot better. No light reflecting just there anymore. It doesn't need much, it's only a micro roll, tiny little thing. And that should be shaving sharp. After stropping it, I would just take a little bit of oil. You don't need much. And place it on the blade like that. I usually use my finger a lot of the time because a rag steals quite a bit of the oil. But a rag will help you clean the blade as well. And you can always carry some very, very fine wet and dry paper to clean any sap stain off the actual carbon steel, which is fairly common. And we can just put this back in the sheath, and hopefully the sheath is dry. I wouldn't put it back in a wet sheath, by the way, just so you know. You've got to put it back in a dry sheath. And that's it, that's the end of the day by the campfire, and your knife's ready to go in your pack and you can go to bed. The grind on this knife's a little bit different. This is a full flat with a micro bevel, and I think a lot of the confusion the people will be, what angle do I hold the blade at? It really is just do it by eye in some respects and by feel. You can see when the light actually disappears at the edge of the blade there, and it doesn't really require much difference than a Scandi grind. In fact, I find micro bevels easier to work with. And you have a nice little choil there, so you can use all of the blade on a stone if needed. You'll see the polishing compound turning grey where it's removing dirt, and also fragments of metal, really small amount of metal. So I'm just periodically checking this, looking for patches of light that I saw before, and you can see that I've pretty much removed all of it, and it's looking how it was when it arrived. Perfect. And that should be shaving sharp, which it is. And obviously a blade like this RWL34. It's a pretty high performance stainless steel, won't require any oiling, so that can just go back in the sheath. The sheath is Kydex, not going to hold any moisture, so you can see how different knives really require different levels of maintenance and work better in different environments. But there are other things you can use to sharpen or hone blades out in the woods. There are many different items, natural items out there that you can actually use. For example, you can use pebbles off of the beach. This is an axe puck that I made while I was on the coastline doing some fishing, and found this stone, very fine grained stone, and it's very useful as a puck for an axe. You can use flat stones as well. If you spend some time flattening them out and rubbing two stones against each other, you can make honing stones out in the wilds if you have that kind of quality of stone available to you. Out in the woods here where I am, there's nothing like that, but on the coastline there's a lot of stones. Some of them are very fine grain that can be used to polish blades and even get a mirror finish. You can find types of fungi as well, Cryptoporus betulinus or birch polypore, often nicknamed the razor strop fungi. Grows on silver birch, obviously quite frequently and exclusively. And at this time of year they're very young. They're little buttons like this, but they grow very long, large and flat, and you can actually dry them out, and they really must be dried if you're going to strop on them. When they dry, they're almost like a leather, like a modelling foam, very dense, very hard, and you can get a thin strip of it and actually mount it to a piece of board and strop on it, and it's very effective at bringing knives back to a bit of a razor sharp edge if they've got slight micro rolling in them. Even animal hide as well. This is a rabbit hide, and you could use the leather on this. If you soaked this and got the hair out, use the leather on it. It's a very thin, fine leather, and if you mounted that on a board, that would be ideal for a Scandi grind or a bevel that you want to keep at a 0 grind, for example. Really nice piece of suede, and really nice to strop on as well if it were glued to a board correctly. So there are things you can use when you're out, and there are skills you can practice. Obviously this is a bit of a basic in bushcraft basics. We're just covering basic skills and getting kit together ready to go out and practice skills, but the further you go into bushcraft skills, you can start getting into all those sorts of things and trying them out, and realise that there are things provided out here by nature really that you can use to maintain your tools if you're in wilderness living situations. One piece of equipment that's useful to carry with you is a honing stone, and stropping might not be enough sometimes to get little rolls out depending on how severe they are. And a stone like this is a Spyderco double stuff stone. You can buy them singly or you can buy them glued together like this, 2 different grades, and it's a very fine stone to use. I used to use one of the DC stones. This is a DC4, and they were pretty good stones, but compare them to what they used to be like and they are worlds apart. If you see an original DC stone and you compare it to one of the newer ones, it's like comparing marble to a brick. It's just 2 totally different grains really, or grades of stone. And the newer ones aren't so good. They're very coarse. They're okay, but unfortunately they changed their design, and that's just really the way it is now. So if you have an older one, then hang on to it, because it's really a really nice piece of kit. But if you have one of the newer ones, you may be looking at some point in the future to move over from that onto something a bit better when you're in the field. And these Spyderco ones are excellent, and they're very fine. They're great for honing. On this knife here there is a slight micro roll that I couldn't get out from stropping. I really just noticed it whilst making the video later on. I can actually see the light coming off of it. We've got some sun coming through the trees there, and I can see it. And if you're fairly confident with one of these stones, it doesn't take much to just hold it and just drag the blade toward you and away from you like this. And it won't need much, and when you get confident with these things, you'll know the angles, and you'll do it all by eye really. I'm using the white side, which is the finer side, because it really is just a micro bevel, and that's completely gone now, just with a few passes on the stone. And that's really what a lot of sharpening is about, I suppose. It's just identifying where on the blade needs attention and then rectifying it by using fine tools and taking away as little metal as possible. So I hope this video has been useful just regarding some very basic maintenance out in the field. And we've covered a variety of different things, but obviously we haven't covered sharpening. We touched on this stone here, which is just a honing stone used very much like the strop in a respect for just kind of taking out rolls and things on your blade. I mean, your blade will very rarely go dull in the field if you keep on top of maintenance, and that's really the key. Maintaining that edge will really save you from overhauling it later down the line. And I think when you're new to bushcraft and you've just got yourself a nice knife and you look at that edge straight out of the box, it can be very daunting to think one day that you have to sharpen that and make it as good as it is or better than it was when it came out of the box. And I think people can hold off of that. And by just doing some very simple maintenance, you will hang on to that edge and you will maintain it for as long as you need to. And only really when the knife has to do some seriously obscene work will the blade dull or roll so badly that it will have to go on the stone. But in next week's episode, we're actually going to have a look at sharpening a knife. And it'll be very similar to what we've done here, just obviously using materials that are designed to take more metal off rather than less. And we'll be doing it in a setting that's a bit more comfortable to simulate being at home. And we'll also touch on this stone a bit more here and using it just to remove some rolls that might not be able to be removed from stropping. So I hope this video's helped out, and thank you for watching, and I will see you very soon for another episode of Bushcraft Basics. And please see the links below in the description if you're interested in any of the products in this video or other links on the channel. Thanks again for watching, guys. Take care.